Hey, so I just wanted to show my progress on this little save data thing that I was having issues with for a few days, and I learned quite a bit about it, as well as some mistakes I had made. So I'm gonna try and talk about that while showing it working in practice. So let's find, yeah, this will work, I guess. So we have a chest that was generated in this dungeon, and it replaced a random loot pile that would normally spawn in this position. What I'm going to show is that even after saving and loading, this chest will retain its state. So here's its, at least rough properties, not the exact to the number properties, but the rough properties. So let's save and then immediately load. And as you can see, through the loading process, the chest is still there in the same spot, as well as with the same, at least these properties. I could have seen the loot, but the loot is the same. You just have to trust me on that. The loot is the same as it was. And now let's go to another chest. Let's try and find, this one is actually in a different block than the primary one. So this showing that the chests currently now stay in the proper block of the dungeon, whatever like their position. They don't get screwed up. And basically one of the primary things I think that was the kind of cause of my initial issues was just I was piggybacking off of the parts of the vanilla save system as well as using cloning or copying the load ID of the initial loot pile instead of making my own for each object, and as well as I made it so the save system is not based off of the vanilla one. Well, yeah, it's not using the vanilla save system. It's all in its own mod save files that comes with the saves, just like other mod save data. But in this case, this also includes the loot piles that are created and the chests themselves. So right now I will look at this chest and I will unlock it, turning into a loot pile. And we will see after loading or saving and then loading again that this will also keep its properties. As you can see, it's in the same position, same thing, still lootable, has the same loot, letter of credit, helmet, all that crap. And one of the major things that I was having issues with was the the loot piles respawning in this spot and like blocking the actual chest. But it only happened the first time for whatever reason. The first time after loading, which was definitely strange. I'll also show it for bashing as well. And that should keep its properties, adamantium helmet and stuff. Yeah, so right now, at least for dungeons, I haven't done anything else for the chest spawning as well as the save stuff for stuff like interiors that aren't dungeons, like houses and stuff. But I'll deal with that when I get to it. But for now, right now, it appears dungeons, the save data part is working perfectly fine, as I expected. Now I'm going to close out of this, and I'm going to show you some of the code that I changed and the kind of methods that I used for this. So, stuff that I changed is I kind of changed how I was doing the save data structurally, sort of. Because originally it was kind of just like haphazardly. Like, I was like, okay, the closed chest data, that where the chest is still locked and everything and has all these different properties assigned to it, I was doing that all through my own save data, which made sense because it was a custom thing. But I was trying to also have the other parts of that save data, that being the actual loot pile that gets created. I was trying to use that same thing and let the vanilla save data deal with that, which it was recognizing it as like a loot pile, obviously, and it was saving it, but it wasn't loading it, which I was really confused about and wondering like why. But then I found later on, after doing a bunch of digging, the reason why was that, let me see if I can find it. Okay, so the reason why is that during the actual loading process, the loot containers would be, recognized, as I said, they'd be logged properly. But when it actually went through the process of trying to reload them, they would be ignored, my custom ones. Not custom, but like my loot piles. And the reason is that the way I had them set up, it was kind of like a weird edge case, in a way, that would basically say like, oh yeah, these things exist, but don't reload them. The reason being that the chest loot piles that I was creating, they were not... They all the loot piles come with this class, serializable loot container attached to them, or this component, Unity component attached to them, by default when they're created. And this makes it so basically the save system recognizes that thing as something that it should record in the save data and keep. But just because it's in there doesn't mean that in the end it actually tries to reload it. And in this case, it wasn't being recognized as a serializable loot container that it should like try to keep and then reload basically, as well as it did not have this custom drop property of a loot pile as true. So it was false. So it basically would go through here, be skipped because it wasn't in this dictionary value, and then it would go through the else over here and be skipped because it wasn't a custom, it wasn't considered a custom drop, so it would be entirely skipped. So you'd see it in the save data, but it would not be loaded. And that took me a little bit to figure out, but thankfully I was able to figure that out. And that's when I basically decided, you know what? I'm just gonna deal with the loot pile entirely myself. My loot piles that I've made entirely myself in my own save data. And that way I wouldn't have to worry about what properties that my loot pile has on it, and to hope that it gets reloaded or whatever. Like, I didn't have to change like anything. I was just like, all right, just do my own stuff and then reload it myself. Because it's not like the reloading process of really doing that much, like, super complicated, that I was like, I probably should just let the game do it by default. So I was like, all right, it's best if I just make another separate save data kind of class here and save both the closed chest and the open chest in the same piece of save data, the same dictionaries, or not the same dictionaries, but the same class LLC save data. So they go into the same file. But the actual one thing that was annoying about this is like it was working fine basically after I did this, after I like restructured things. But one thing that was annoying that I was like, okay, so with loot piles, or just saving loot or items in general, it takes up a lot of space. Like the text documents that are deserialized, actually serialized. The text documents that are serialized for the save data, especially for the items, takes up a lot of actual like space in a text document, and it takes up like a good amount of memory. Not so much, just like hard drive memory. Like the saves become big, like fairly big, just from saving these items, because they take up a shit ton of text on the for each item entry, because they have so many different properties and such, and there could be a lot of items. So I was like, okay, I don't want the game to recognize my loot piles as something it should care about in terms of the actual saving process. I just want my own mod to care about those, and then have the game's base save data ignore that. So what I had to do was a little bit weird, but it did work. I had to, what is this? I think it's down here. Yeah. So every time that I created these Daggerfall loot objects for the loot piles as well as for the reloading of the loot piles, I'm creating this Daggerfall loot object. But this Daggerfall loot game object is class game object, whatever you want to say. It by default, when it is created, it is actually a prefab or something like that. It's a prefab that has default parameters that whenever it is made, it starts with some components attached to it already. And in this case, just one of the many parts that are already attached for Daggerfall loot when any are created is this one, serializable loot container. And that is essentially what tells the game to care about that during a save, during a save, and say, okay, record this because it has this component attached to it, serializable loot containers or container. So what I was like, okay, I don't want the game to care about that then. So what I did is I found out that you can take individual components that are attached to a game object and remove them. So that's what I did, is that whenever now I'm creating the one of these loot piles from opening a chest or whatever, opening a chest in whatever way, I make sure at the very end, well, it doesn't have to be at the end, but I do it that way just because, but I make sure at the end to do destroy, and then I tell it to use that Daggerfall loot object, get component, and then I give it the type for that serializable loot container. So that this is telling it to take that serializable loot container object that's attached to all Daggerfall loot things by default and get rid of it. And this way, the save system will completely ignore my custom loot pile thing and not waste more memory in a save than it needs to, because all of it will be incorporated into my old mod's save text file. So that was one thing that I did that I think was cool. That, you know, that'll save like I don't know, a few hundred kilobytes every save, which I think is a good thing because DFU saves are already can be pretty bulky as it is. And then one of the other things that I did with the save data, or that I changed, obviously, is I had to add the open chests loot pile thing onto this whole thing instead of just the closed ones. But now that I kind of understood how this worked better, I was able to kind of consolidate a few things here and there and make it a little bit simpler. But for whatever reason, I don't know why there's the issue I was having with the positioning problems. I think it really comes down to the fact that I was trying to use the old loot pile's parent object or something like that and positions, and it just really wasn't like working out. Or it was working out, but at least on loot piles that were saved in different blocks than the primary one, the one that has the exit in a dungeon, they would be in weird spots. And I'm still not entirely sure why that was the case, but somehow whatever thing that I changed and started doing instead, they started to work. So that's good. The other thing that I did to at least resolve the issue that I was having, that was like my most annoying issue, was why that those every time you'd save and then load the first time, the loot piles in those positions would like regenerate for whatever reason. So the way that I dealt with that is not in a very elegant way, but it does work. And I kind of imagined I would have to be doing it like this. So I'm not too unhappy with the result. It's just a little bit strange. So basically what I'm doing, whenever the restore save data thing for the mod save data is called, is I'm obviously going through whatever save data that my mod made, and then going through that to try and recreate the objects in their original state that they were saved in, which happens all here. Like these dictionary entries are for the closed chest and the open chest loot piles and stuff. And then it goes through these methods to recreate them in the scene. And yeah, it's not like too special or anything here. It's just kind of it's basically just doing exactly what I do when I normally create the objects, but just doing it through this save data instead of with other properties, I guess. But the thing that I did to resolve the other issue of the respawning loot piles was this, where I'm making a list of all of the game objects that are currently in the scene that have the Daggerfall loot component attached to them. Making a list, making a array technically, but same thing. List array, basically same thing. But I'm making a list of all of those loot piles that are in the scene, and I am afterward filtering through them to only care about the loot piles that are the random loot piles that I initially use for the positional references to where my chests should be placed and which ones should be placed and stuff like that. They only care about those random static loot piles that are generated. And the way that I'm filtering through that, it's not the best way, is that apparently they always have the loot container type of random treasure, and they always have the container image type, or the inventory image of chest. So that's how I'm determining which of these, all of these loot piles in the scene are the ones that I care about, for one. And then I am taking the billboard, the billboard or Daggerfall billboard component that is attached to them, which they all generate with the loot piles. They all have the billboard, basically. Well, not necessarily. Some of them get it removed if they're a 3D model, but that's a different story. But I'm taking that billboard, and the reason I'm doing that is because if it's the loot pile itself, it has a different transform value or a different positional value attached to it than the actual billboard. The billboard is the thing that actually you can see and you can interact with, whereas the loot pile might be something that has a different positional property than the billboard itself. So that's why I'm taking specifically or explicitly the billboard and taking that instead. Then I'm taking the vector 3 or whatever the 3D vector of the loot pile, the transformed opposition, and then I'm iterating through that particular one of the loot piles or whatever, and I'm comparing it to the position of the current position that is saved for each one of the chests and the loot pile and the chest loot piles that are saved in my save data. And initially, like normally this wouldn't seem like a big deal or anything, but I had to do, since they're float values, these positional values, I had to do a lot of screwing around, because if you just try to do position, is this position equal to that position, it would not work most of the time, because the actual float values would be just slightly different, that they wouldn't be exactly equal. So I had to do something that I hadn't really done before, which was make another method. And I also looked, this is mostly from people helping me or giving me advice on the Discord server, as well as some stuff on like Stack Overflow that I found. So I made this method called within margin of error pos position. Within margin of error position. So it's taking all of the it's taking the two vector 3D vectors of the chest or the chest open chest loot pile, and the other value for the loot pile that's trying to generate or trying to be created by DFU in that spot. And it's taking the individual X, Y, and Z coordinates from those two vectors and comparing them. In this way, it's able to basically determine within some defined these values, these accepted differences, within these value ranges, if they are close enough to be equal, basically. So it's taking all three of them, and then if all of them are within that accepted difference value, then it says yes, they're equal. And in that case, it says, okay, this loot pile that's trying to generate or whatever is in the same position as the chest. So it adds it to a list that I made just because lists are easier to add to than arrays and everything. But it adds it to another list called delete queue. And then when all of this comparison has been done, at the very end, it loops through this delete queue, or iterates through the list of the delete queue and destroys all of the game objects for those loot piles that were found to be within the same position or close enough position to the chest objects to say, okay, those should be gotten rid of. So every time that the game loads within a dungeon, at least in this case, it does this, and whenever those loot piles try to regenerate before the game actually, when like the screen is still black, it deletes all of them, so you don't have that issue where they kind of regenerate. It's a little bit weird, but it works. It's just strange that DFU does that, where it tries to like regenerate them in those kind of cases. But that's how I was able to fix this. That's what the changes I made to make the save data stuff work out in the end. Like I said, at least for dungeons, I'm sure I'm gonna have to do some different stuff for other interiors like buildings, as well as eventually for exteriors, but I'm not really worried about that for right now. But for dungeons, at least, it seems to work perfectly fine, which I'm happy with. Probably for right now, like almost the most perfect kind of like solutions in the end. So it only took me a few days, which is good, to get to this point. So I'm happy about that. This video went way longer than it should have, but whatever. I'll probably just make this actually part 41 in the series than honestly, because this is kind of like a showcase more than it was just like a little video like that other one. So I'll probably make this part 41, so screw it. The next thing I'm probably going to start working on, now that I'm pretty happy with the save data and its like kind of framework here that I can work upon and build upon when I need to, is I'm probably going to have to work on fixing some bugs and other stuff involving the formulas, like for the bashing and the other formulas, and fixing math and trying to make it so it fits better and everything. It's going to be annoying, take a lot of testing and a lot of trying to get a feel for like what things feel like what values feel good. Probably a lot of like math and making some line graphs or some crap if possible to try and get some balanced quote-unquote values and stuff. But that's probably the next thing I'm going to work on. But thankfully, now that I got this save data crap done, which I'm very happy about, I will move on and continue on towards getting this mod into public release, which should be fairly soon, honestly. I hope that doing the formula changes and the balancing stuff works out well. Oh yeah, I also had to balance or change out how the loot is generated and stuff, because it's mostly placeholder stuff, but that's for next time. For right now, the save data I'm pretty happy with, so yeah, that's all I wanted to say, but thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.